Welcome to the Perspective Knoll, a channel that creates audiobooks from original stories and including some fan fiction short stories in between. If this is something you're into, then feel free to like and subscribe so that you don't miss any of our new content.
Chapter 26. Argatha comes clean. Argatha had helped Charles out of the cage and with her magic, helped him slowly float down to the floor. Another fairy also helped Marla out of her cage and the tension in the air seemed to have gone away completely. Chrono was now leaning up against a wall and was completely dumbstruck at the turn of events. There was a fight moments ago in which he knew was going to take place, but he had never imagined that a ghost would just appear and defuse the situation. Furthermore, it's a ghost of someone who his own prince had raised back into this world. It's like he had the foresight, said Chrono as Marla and Charles walked over to him and Argatha still keeping close to Charles himself. Like he knew it all along that this spirit would follow Charles here, and would be able to speak to his wife in order for the outcome to be calm like it is. I don't see how, Charles said as he was scratching his head. Dale has a mind of his own. He could have gone anywhere. I mean the chances of him being here or at least knowing that I would make the trip here in the Western Kingdom are slim to none at best. I went back to my home world and returned with a new plan. I never once saw Dale in between the first time I left Jordan's post until now. Marla stepped up to Charles and tried a more logic side of the story that she would believe. Dale did say he was here to watch over you, so maybe it's only a coincidence. The gift of foresight has never been a gift among our people. So, unless Prince Insernol is not a... Please, don't even say it, Chrono interrupted her with his hand up. As far as I know, he and his brother are as much of a Gorferndain elf as any of us. Either one will be able to rule on the throne as our king. Marla looked back at Dale and Karen as they were both still catching up on their time without one another. Argatha, on the other hand, tapped Charles on the shoulder once more and seemed eager to tell him something. Charles, you must let me come clean about everything. Argatha was sitting on a higher shelf of a bookcase and was practically at eye level with him. I know what you did. You killed Ed, plain and simple. Charles felt like there wasn't anything more to say. I did it for your world, Charles. I did it for my friendship with Chloe. Argatha paused for a moment while she was trying to find the best place to start her explanation. Ed never wanted to remain on Earth once he built the cabin in Brunil. He wanted to live as long as he could with the love of his life. The battle between the trolls and elves was never about taking the other's land. Charles gave a laugh as he shook his head. That part doesn't surprise me. The wood elves had been small for so long to avoid Jolene and the Stormbreaker owls that they had no land to give. My God, they lived under a bridge. Argatha merely nodded her head in agreement. You are wise, Charles, but there was a fight between the two of them nonetheless. Karen had overheard what Argatha was saying and walked across the floor to her. Everyone in the room was now in a half-moon arc in front of Argatha. It was King Uriel who asked the trolls to initiate the attack. The Wood Elves would not support the Western Kingdom in their expedition to take over Earth, but since they knew of their plan, the King and Queen feared that Valinor would talk. So, to silence them, they told the trolls to wipe them out. No one thought that a bear from the Hiatus Mountains would be there to oppose the trolls and at the time 4 people from Earth. Charles had then remembered something that he was told on his first day in Lufforain. That's right, Neil deGrasse Tyson had said something about a couple that had been there since the First World War. It makes you wonder if Valinor was protecting them for decades? Charles then shook his head. But I'd seen the note from Queen Memphia herself. She told Valinor that she was searching for all the paintings and something like 14 of them were already located or they had in their possession. All to let Valinor know that the inevitable was coming, said Argatha. So, there was a feast in the dining hall here in the castle for a truce between the trolls and the elves. But that was the day that Uriel had pulled Ed aside and told him that if he didn't help in his takeover of Earth, then he would be killed. Chloe as well. Chrono was standing there pondering a thought and then he said what was on his mind. That seems crazy to me. Why would he give up the world he knows, for them? Love makes people do stupid things, said Charles. It makes sense though. Ed was done living on Earth anyways. So, if King Uriel and Queen Memphia took over Earth, then they might just live in Lufforain as they wanted and do their best to not think of what's going on in their old world. Wait a second, what was that thing that Ed wore around his neck? The medallion? Argatha was surprised that Charles would even ask that question. That was a relic that King Uriel took off from his own body and Queen Memphia infused it with a bit of magic. It ended up being a way to communicate to one another, no matter if Ed was here or back on Earth. Charles had snapped his fingers as the large puzzle piece fell into place. That's why it looked funny while I was using my lawman ability in the Spencer house. Plus, Anthony said his father never liked to talk about it. Surely his son would protest or even physically fight his father, if he knew that he was going to be responsible for letting in an invasion upon the planet. Argatha sighed, and her eyes were tearing up. So, I thought I had to kill him. I did it too, well in the least to slow down their plans on the invasion. I knew they had other paintings and possibly other people on Earth just like Ed who would be waiting for the call and to make sure that on their end, the painting was hung and protected at all times. Argatha, began Charles and held out a hand for her. I'm sorry. I should have got the story straight before I began hunting you down without understanding your possible motive. If it was me, I would have killed him too. Argatha reached her arms out and instead of shaking Charles' hand, she only managed to shake a couple of his fingers. Would you really? Asked Dale. If it was your son who had the medallion and was guarding the painting, then would you have killed him? Charles was stunned by the question and made him completely rethink what he would have done. Sure, he would have killed Ed, or figured out another way to stop him, but that's because he wasn't close to Ed. He would never have thought of killing his own son. Charles, we must go back to the forest and take the painting out of the shed and go hide it. Maybe let Harmon take it to the mountains back to his family. It would definitely be safe there. Argatha stared into Charles with every ounce of trust she could. She really wanted him to believe that she was one of the good guys in all of this. Well, to be honest, the painting was taken down, Charles said slowly. But what? Asked Argatha as she gave Charles a sharp look. We strapped it to Harmon and now the painting is here. Wow, Marla said while throwing her hands up in the air. Well, let's not make this too easy for them. Look, we didn't know, we thought you were working with the Gorferndain elves to take over Earth. At the time, said Charles as he pointed at Argatha, and in Charles' defense, Anthony, Laurie, and Harmon all agreed that moving the painting was the right thing to do. How did that union come to be anyways, you and the Gorferndain elves, Argatha? Just like everyone else, we fairies dream, and that's when I was approached by a man named Ipog. It all came whirling back to Charles. The conversation with a man in his dream, the first night that he was in Lufforain, was named Ipog. He said that it was a prophecy that a lawman would save Lufforain. It was no surprise that I could see through his disguise, though he did try to hide it, continued Argatha. Ipog was not his name but an acronym which tells who he is, which translates to Insamal Prince of Gorferndain. He told me that there is someone special waiting for me on Earth. Someone who could help restore the life of Lufforain and its secrecy. He told me to search for the fairy caretaker in the Western Kingdom and await further instructions. He said he'll contact me in my dreams. So that's how you became a spy for my people, said Chrono rubbing his chin and just like everyone else, putting the last of the puzzle pieces together. No one else here suspected that? All the other fairies and Karen herself looked shocked and there were clearly some shameful looks being directed in Argatha's way. Karen walked up to Argatha and gave her a hug and she told the fairy that everything was going to be okay. Suddenly it felt as if the entire castle was shaking like there was an earthquake taking place just below their feet. This only lasted for half a second and then a loud boom came from one of the floors above them. Chrono checked the ceiling and was eyeing any of the stones to see if they might have been jarred loose enough to fall and threatened to take any of them out. Let's move out into the hall. Chrono ordered and Marla led the charge. What's happening? Charles asked. Are we being attacked by the Gorferndain elves? No, we were told that they would wait for our signal before they would make a move. If no signal came then they would rethink their strategy, answered Chrono and he looked up the stairs and then gestured for them to follow him. Upwards they climbed the wide spiral staircase until they reached to the top and that's when they came upon a door that was blown off its hinges. Inside the room, there were dozens of soldiers lying dead and, oddly enough, children who were also lying dead on the floor. Charles walked by some of the children and noticed that every one of them had no eyes at all, and they looked pale as if they had been dead for days or more. The soldiers looked like they had died within the last few minutes. Charles then focused his attention on the walls. It was a very wide circular room, and along the walls, there were oil paintings, and all had the same golden frame as the one that acted as a doorway from this world to his own. On the far right side of the room, there was a large hole blown out, and standing at the edge was a woman. There was also a female guard, the one who just came sprinting from outside, known as Leah. She was standing at the ready with her weapon drawn and had her back to Charles and the others who just came in. "Who are you?" Leah asked the woman as she cautiously moved closer. The woman turned, and her black hair was being swept across her face from the strong wind that was now flowing through the room. "My name is Jolene Hamlin." Holy shit, Charles was stunned. This was the very woman who Shawn had been taken prisoner by. Charles tried to gather his words from his thoughts, but everything was scrambled and all that came out was a weak puff of air. "Where's the king and queen?" asked Leah, and now her sword was tightly in her grip, and she was ready to strike. "Well, Uriel is down there now. I just blasted him out of the castle, but he is standing, so all that means is that I need to try harder." Jolene then returned her gaze to the opening and breathed in deep. "The queen was never here." "You mean she is somewhere else within the castle?" asked Chrono, who now had his crossbow out and was pointing it at Jolene. "I don't know. We all fought so hard and, in the chaos, I never saw her." Jolene then withdrew from the opening in the wall and walked over to a lump on the floor. She knelt and brushed over it with her hand. Charles then moved in close and found out that the lump was a massive wolf. "It's going to be okay, Dremmer. I'll get you back home safe." "What happened here?" asked Leah, who was now standing right behind Jolene and still ready to strike at any sort of a threatening movement. "Tell us or we'll kill you now." The wolf then lifted its head and coughed, and there was a little bit of blood that he spat out. "I'm sorry, my queen," said Dremmer weakly. "We made mistakes." Save your strength," whispered Jolene as she brushed the side of his face. Jolene stood up and turned around to face Leah. "I came here to challenge Queen Memphia to a mage duel. I thought if I could beat her, then I could claim the city as my own by showing my powers and that I had the right to rule, and a better means to protect the people of the West. When we came through the doors, there were guards, all lining up as if ready to go through the paintings," Jolene continued, and she seemed to be in shock. Her voice was soft and almost dreamlike and wore no expression at all. "My children took care of them as best they could, but there were just so many of them. I hadn't prepared my army, as best I should have, and fear took most of them before they were struck down. Dremmer, my most faithful wolf, was so heroic and slayed many men to help me get to Uriel. I was disappointed when Memphia was nowhere in sight. Well, that explains why we didn't run into any guards once we got into the castle," said Marla, and she walked over to Dremmer and could see a large cut on the top of his right shoulder. Dremmer looked up at her and gave a slight whimper. Marla was always heavy-hearted when it came to an animal in pain, and she desperately wanted to help the wolf in any way she could. Argatha looked out onto the road below, and that's when she saw King Uriel standing there looking back up at her, and his face twisted with rage. Yet the next moment the king was being wrapped up in layers and layers of what looked like white bandages. Soon Uriel looked like a mummy, and he hit the ground hard and gave another muffled roar and then was quickly surrounded. Standing around him now were a handful of mages, and a few patronal hounds had now begun circling around him. "Everyone, stay where you are," demanded a stern voice from the doorway, and everyone turned to see a mage standing there and another patronal hound by his side. Charles was in fear of that beast above anything else he had seen yet in all of Lufforain. Those yellow eyes burned into his soul, and he suddenly felt that this was exactly how he was going to die. That beast was going to devour him slowly and painfully. "What's a Severlan mage doing here?" asked Chrono. "Cleaning up a mess," the mage answered, and then more mages began pouring into the room.